Excellent. Well, welcome on behalf of the Minneapolis Institute of Arts, the Paintings Curatorial Council, and the Print and Drawing Curatorial Council. I want to welcome you here today for what is going to be a wonderful lecture from Dr. Chu on collecting drawings in the 19th century and maybe a little bit about 18th century as well. But I'm not going to introduce Dr. Chu. I'm here to introduce Gabe Weisberg, who will then introduce Dr. Chu. We like you to have a lot of contact with the curators here. My name is Lisa Michaud, and I am the Associate Curator of Prints and Drawings here at the Institute. And it has really been my honor and pleasure to work with Dr. Weisberg and his wife Yvonne on the great exhibition that's up right now called Expanding the Boundaries. And this exhibition is really a celebration of the Weisbergs' promised gift of their entire collection of 19th century drawings. For us, it really is a transformative gift in that it just completely does expand the boundaries of what we here at the Institute the story we can tell about collecting drawings in the 19th century, about the scope and the diversity and really to go beyond what we've had. And also, by telling us about this gift so early on in the game, it allows us to collect strategically, to know what we already have coming and not to duplicate and really work with what we have and to create just a tremendous collection of drawings. So we're so grateful for that. Dr. Weisberg really is a great treasure. Locally, he has produced so many art historians, quite a few on the staff, me included, and nationally, he has so respected. Dr. Chu worked recently on a wonderful book called 21st Century Perspectives on 19th Century Art and Essays in Honor of Dr. Weisberg. And this is a wonderful book, which I'm sure you can get through our bookstore downstairs. And this really shows the level of respect. So really early in his career to have so many colleagues step up and say, yes, I want to be involved in this. And internationally, Dr. Weisberg is currently working on an exhibition with the Van Gogh Museum, his second exhibition with the Van Gogh Museum, on the naturalist illusion, salon painting, photography, and early cinema, in which he is the guest curator. And so if you're over there in 2010, you really must take that in. We want to also tell you that the catalog comes with this exhibition, Expanding the Boundaries. Gabe will be here today, so if you rush down and buy one, I'm sure he would sign it for you. Just a little bit of that. And, you know, and we all want more. We just want more programming, and this week is a big week for this exhibition. On Thursday, the 19th, coming up, there is going to be, it's a third Thursday event as well as another event for our Print and Drawing Council and the Paintings Council, and this is going to be a tour that Gabe is going to give in the galleries at 5:30, reception following at 6:30, and then it is the third Thursdays when you have the opportunity to see the movie The Gleaners and I, a 2001 award-winning French documentary, as well as listen to the music of the Deaths. So, it's going to be a wonderful experience and a very fun night at the museum. And next Saturday, right, on February 21st, Gabe is going to be teaching an art history seminar on collecting drawings and on drawings in the 19th century. So there are so many things to do, and we're so happy to have you all here today. So now I'm going to hand over the podium to Dr. Weisberg.
Lisa, thank you very, very much. And it's always a pleasure to be here, but especially a pleasure today to introduce Petra Chu, who is one of our closest and most long-standing colleagues and friends in the field of 19th century art. And in her own way, really a connoisseur, using that particular word, which isn't used too often in art history studies, a connoisseur of art and especially drawings. One of the important things about Petra is that for 21 years, and even more, she was a chair of the art and music department at Seton Hall University, while she also brought up 4 children. Rather remarkable statement, because at the same time as she was bringing up the children and taking care of a department, always a difficult matter, she was able to have a very, very productive career as an art historian, becoming, I would say, the foremost scholar on the work and writings of Gustave Courbet. She published a book with the University of Chicago, The Letters of Gustave Courbet, in 1992. And just recently with Princeton Press, she published a more serious interpretive study of Courbet called The Most Arrogant Man in France, which I think goes beautifully with Gustave Courbet because, after all, he was indeed not only a great artist, but he was a fundamental pain. One of the nice things that we see today is that there are a number of students in this room, some of whom have taken our course at the university on 19th and early 20th century art. And in recent years, we have used Petra Chew's amazingly concise, historical, and interpretive text on 19th century European art. And I'm sure that many of the students here will agree that this text augmented what we tried to do in the course in a very strong way. Now, in addition to all of these accomplishments, Petra has also led the way in another area, which is very important for art historians, namely the area of electronic media, and has become the founding editor of 19th Century Art Worldwide. We are now in our 7th year, and there are some members in the audience who have also published in this particular journal, and this is a very significant area for all of us to realize. Today, Petra will talk about one of her specializations, 19th century drawing, an appreciation and collecting of them, and without further ado, Petra Chew.
Thank you very much, Gabe, for this nice introduction. It's great to be here in Minneapolis. This is my 4th time, and I always enjoy myself very, very much when I'm here. So today is no exception. My talk today is about collecting and its history. Now, the history of collecting is a topic that has long remained understudied because it doesn't fit squarely in a single academic discipline. While it appears to fall within the purview of business and economics, as it involves buying, selling, and investment, few business historians have been interested in its study. Collecting also would seem a proper field of investigation for social scientists, sociologists, anthropologists, and psychologists, particularly when it comes to answering the question why people collect. The German-born psychoanalyst Werner Münsterberger has addressed this topic in his book, Collecting: An Unruly Passion, of 1994. His book, while interesting, is heavily colored by the author's Freudian training and leaves the reader wanting for a more balanced socio-psychological, or for that matter, anthropological treatment of the subject. Collecting is of interest as well, or at least it should be, to those who study the objects that are being collected. That is to say, art historians, when it comes to art collections, archaeologists in the case of collections of archaeological objects, historians when the collections contain historical objects, etc., etc. Recently, this object-centered interest in collections has blossomed, sparked in part by the emergence of the new field of museum studies, which has emphasized the importance of provenance, that is to say, the history of ownership of objects. As a result, there is a growing interest today in the trajectory of art and archaeological objects from the time when they were created to the present. Indeed, who has owned a work of art and where and in whose collection it has been before it ended up in a museum or private collection has become a subject of such interest that provenance now may lend substantial added value to a work. Maybe we can have the first slide now. Oh, maybe we can darken it a little bit. In 2001, for example, the Getty Museum in Santa Monica paid $2.6 million, almost twice the auction estimate, for a small painting by the little-known 16th century German artist Hans Hofmann. What was the reason for this seemingly exorbitant price? Hofmann's painting once belonged to the Habsburg Emperor Rudolf II, one of the most famous collectors of all times. This made the painting more marketable and drove up its price. In fact, drove it up to double its estimate. But the history of collecting is pursued not merely so that dealers and auction houses can add value to works of art. Art historians are primarily interested in it because it provides an insight into changing patterns of taste and aesthetic sensibilities. It is this aspect of the history of collecting that I will emphasize in my talk. The exhibition here in Minneapolis of the collection of Yvonne and Gabriel Weisberg offers an opportunity to talk about a specific subset of collecting, namely the collection of artist drawings. Though many drawings have been and still are collected in the context of comprehensive art collections, collections that may also contain paintings, sculptures, and decorative arts, there have long been collectors who focused exclusively on drawings. It is generally assumed that those who confine themselves to the collecting of drawings do so because they have limited financial means, and there is a basis of truth underlying these assumptions. Drawings on the whole tend to be less expensive than paintings or sculptures. But the collecting of drawings is not merely a function of economics. It also has long been linked to exquisite taste and connoisseurship. Princes buy statues, bankers buy paintings, but only those with refined taste become interested in drawings, wrote the French museum curator Henri Jouin in the middle of the 19th century. His statement was echoed in a recent article in the French newspaper Le Monde, which was entitled "Drawing, Sanctuary of the Erudite Connoisseur in a World of Money. Le dessin refuge du collectionneur érudit dans un monde d'argent." The title of the article applies spot on Yvonne and Gabriel Weisberg, whose fine and unusual collection is informed by an in-depth knowledge of and profound insight into the works that they have brought together over the past 40 years. The 19th century French connoisseur and collector Philippe de Gennevière once wrote, quote, "Every collector worthy of the name must limit the field of his finds," end quote. Yvonne and Gabriel Weisberg, knowingly or unknowingly, have followed his advice. They have not merely limited their collecting activities to drawings, but to drawings of a specific place and time. The works in their collection are all French or Belgian, and for the most part date from the second half of the 19th century. The choice of this period is not accidental. The second half of the 19th century was a distinctive period in the history of drawing, and for that matter also in the history of collecting, as it was the first time in history when drawings were made for the specific purpose of being collected. In other words, drawings were made directly for the market or commissioned from artists by dealers or collectors. Now, this does not mean that drawings were not collected before the middle of the 19th century. They certainly were, as we shall see momentarily. But the drawings that were collected in the 17th, 18th, and early half of the 19th century, with few exceptions, were not made in first instance to be collected, but rather for other purposes. If and when they were sold, it was mostly after their makers' deaths, when their practical usefulness to the artist had ceased. What then was the purpose of drawings before the middle of the 19th century? Many were made as preliminary studies for paintings. Ingres' drapery study on the left is a good example. It is one of more than 200 drawings made by Ingres in preparation of his large painting, The Martyrdom of Saint-Symphorien, a painting that was commissioned by the Cathedral of Saint-Lazare in Autun. Preliminary drawings may, like Ingres' drawing, be studies from life for specific details in painting, like in this case, the head of this centurion that you see in the back of the painting. Oh, I have a pointer here, even better. So this is for this figure over here. They may also be drawings for various kind of details, a hand, a foot, a necklace, and for example, this is a belated example of a preliminary drawing which is in the exhibition. You see here, of course, a drawing for one of the figures, but also a separate drawing here for a small detail in a painting, which is the detail of the hand. Preliminary drawings also include compositional sketches in which the artist visualizes the composition of a painting before he makes the underdrawing for the painting on the primed canvas or the wall. And an example are these drawings by Leonardo da Vinci for the composition of the Last Supper. Not all preliminary drawings serve as studies for paintings or sculptures. Numerous drawings were made as prototypes for prints and book illustrations, such as Albrecht Dürer's preliminary drawing for the woodcut portrait of Emperor Maximilian, which you see here on the left and the woodcut on the right. Such drawings were handed over to a professional printmaker, a copper or wood engraver, or a lithographer, who would translate the drawing into a print or a book illustration. If preliminary drawings make up one large category of artist drawings, a second important group is composed of what the French call croquis, a word that defies exact English translations. Croquis are best described as rapid sketches that serve as memory or conceptual aids. Artists make croquis of persons, objects, or scenes that they observe and that intrigue them. Rembrandt's drawing of two women teaching a child to walk falls into this category. Quickly drawn with a few chalk lines, it was never intended as a study for a painting or a preliminary drawing for a print. It was a visual notation, comparable to a written note a writer might make about something he or she has observed or thought about. A croquis may also be a quick sketch for an imagined figure or scene or the concept of a new painting. And here you have a croquis by Delacroix, which eventually would lead to his painting of Medea. By the late 18th century, croquis were often made in sketchbooks, which were especially designed for this purpose. Many artists carried small pocket sketchbooks with them at all times. In them, they recorded their observations. Here, for example, on the left is a sketchbook that was used by the French Romantic painter Théodore Géricault at the beginning of the 19th century. It is quite small, 6 by 4 inches, and it was used to quickly capture an observation that perhaps could later be used as the artist was working on a painting. And here you see one of these rapid sketches of two horse behinds. One imagines that Géricault would sometimes consult these sketchbooks, perhaps when he was painting a horse in the studio, and if he wanted to remember how the tail was attached to the rump, he would kind of go back to these sketchbooks. In addition to preliminary drawings and croquis, there was a third major group of drawings comprised of works that were made for study. Drawing was a major part of the curriculum of the art academies of Europe and the Americas from the mid-17th century onwards. Students began their training by drawing from engravings after classical sculptures. Then they would draw for many months after plaster cast. And after that, they would spend a year or more drawing from live models. While student drawings may show the inexperience of their makers, more often than not, they're highly accomplished and often quite beautiful in their own right. And here we have an early academic study by Cézanne, somebody you wouldn't even think anymore as doing this kind of work. Some artists, like Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, continued making very finished academic drawings long after his study period was over, in fact, throughout his career. These drawings, like the ones that he had done as a student in the academy, were never meant to be sold or even to be exhibited. We may consider them as practice pieces, equivalent to a musical etude that a professional pianist would play. They were drawings that the artist did for his own artistic edification and satisfaction. Neither preliminary drawings nor croquis or student drawings, in other words, none of the drawings we have just looked at, were made in first instance to be sold to collectors. Traditionally, such drawings remained in the artist's studio, serving him, or occasionally her, at once as a visual reference and a teaching tool. Indeed, artists traditionally allowed their students to study or copy their drawings. They also, on occasion, exchanged drawings among themselves. Drawings were not always treated with great care. There are numerous anecdotes about them being used to light a fire or for other mundane purposes that would lead to their destruction. The 17th century Italian painting Agostino Carracci, so the story goes, was about to clean a greasy frying pan with one of his drawings when his students ripped it from his hand to preserve it. Only one kind of drawing was purposely made to change hands, the portrait drawing. From the 16th century onward, portrait drawings were given or sold to their sitters. Albrecht Dürer is known to have made numerous portrait drawings as a way to make some extra money. By the 17th century, portrait drawings were considered a cheap substitute for painted portraits, and they remained so until the early 19th century, when the artist Ingres and his followers produced hundreds of portrait drawings for a new middle-class public that could ill afford painted portraits. Today, they are considered among Ingres' most interesting works, particularly if they also represent somebody like Paganini. But the artist himself looked upon this artistic activity as a bit of a chore that was below his dignity as an artist. Though with the exception of portrait drawings were not purposely made to be marketed and sold, they were nonetheless collected as early as the 16th century. Some of the first collectors of drawings were artists. As mentioned earlier, it was common for artists to exchange drawings, a custom that probably went back to the beginning of the 16th century. One of the earliest and most famous examples of an exchange of drawings between artists was the one that was made between the German artist Dürer and the Italian Renaissance master Raphael at the turn of the 15th century. The two artists, both at the height of their fame, were not acquainted personally, but they corresponded and sent one another a drawing. So it was a kind of an artistic, kind of polite gesture. Through such exchanges, some artists may have built small collections, though probably they never amounted to more than a few dozen. Among the first artists to purposely build substantial collections of drawings was Giorgio Vasari, who was more famous for his book of biographies of Italian artists than for his art itself. Vasari's collection was contained in an album, the drawings were glued down to the pages of the album, which he referred to as the Libro dei Disegni, or the Book of Drawings. In the albums, the drawings were glued down and set in elaborate frames that were designed by Vasari. And here you see one page, the front and the back of a page in that album. The Libro was exceedingly well known in its time and became a model for other collectors. Indeed, as Italian art historian Matteo Lanfranconi has said, it was Vasari who disseminated the notion in Italy that, quote, drawings could be of historical value as well as a source of aesthetic pleasure, end quote. By the late 16th century, collecting drawings indeed became a fashionable activity in Italy, and soon it also spread beyond its borders. But by and large, this did not cause artists to begin to produce drawings for the sole purpose of being collected. Most artists continued to hold onto their drawings for reference and teaching purposes. But many understood that their drawings could one day become valuable, and that as a consequence, they could become an important asset for their heirs. Artists commonly willed their drawing portfolios to their families or to friends or students. The artist and monk Fra Bartolomeo, for example, left the bulk of his drawings to Sister Plautilla Nelli, a nun in a convent in Siena who had once been his pupil. Whatever you want to think about that. In the 17th and 18th century, collecting drawings became a common activity. Drawings were collected by royal and aristocratic collectors, usually in the context of larger art collections that also comprised paintings, sculptures, and decorative arts. About the traffic of drawings at this time, we still do not know much. Major collectors often had agents who scoured the European continent for works of art. And these agents frequently relied on experts for advice on the quality and authenticity of works. And this was particularly important when it came to buying drawings, as they often presented attribution and authenticity problems. Drawings very often were not signed, and so that was a difficulty. Experts often turned into collectors themselves and did some dealing as well. The French drawing expert Pierre-Jean Mariette, who prepared catalogs of several major drawing collections in Europe, also bought and sold drawings and amassed an important collection of his own. Agents and experts, like Mariette, often bought at public auctions, where the content of artist studios were sold together with the drawing portfolios of collectors who had died or were forced to sell their collection due to financial problems. As early as the 17th century, special art auctions were held in England and in the continent in taverns and coffee houses. Specialized art auction houses emerged in the 18th century with the foundation of Sotheby's in 1744 and Christie's in 1766. It would be impossible to mention all drawing collectors in the 17th and 18th centuries when collecting drawings was a fashionable pastime. But it is possible to say something about their collecting habits. Generally, drawings were not framed and hung on the wall, but kept in books. This loose term could mean albums in which the drawings were glued down, such as Vasari's drawing book, or it could mean portfolios. And in this portrait of Madame de Pompadour by Boucher, you see one of those portfolios resting against the table, and I've enlarged the detail there on your right, and you see the drawings kind of sticking out. As collectors often owned thousands of drawings, it was necessary to organize them by some method. This could be alphabetically by artist, chronologically, and by school, or it could be according to subject matter. Many collectors had a special mark or stamp that they put on the drawings or the mount of the drawings in their collection. And you see them here on this drawing, two of these stamps, again, enlarged here. These collector's marks are important today as they identify the collector or collectors who once owned a drawing. The Dutch drawing collector and connoisseur Frits Lucht, in 1921, published a reference work in which he identified all these collector's marks that he had found on drawings and gave a brief biography of each collector and a description of his or her collection. This work was a real breakthrough in the study of the history of collecting of drawings, as it allowed scholars to establish the provenance of many old master drawings in public and private collections. Now we get to the 19th century. The collecting of drawings continued relatively unchanged in the first half of the 19th century. though collecting generally experienced something of a shift, especially in France, where the royal collections were taken over by the state and placed in the Louvre, while many aristocratic collections were dismantled and sold. The new grand collectors of the early 19th century were the nouveau riche industrialists. In the course of the 19th century, they became less numerous in Europe as their numbers increased in the US. Of course, by the end of the century, you have the Fricks and the Pierpont Morgans and so on. But all this had little effect on the collecting of drawings, as for a long time already, it had been an activity of middle-class connoisseurs like Mariette, whom we mentioned earlier. While relatively little is known about the art trade, and particularly the traffic in drawings during the 17th and 18th centuries, a good deal more is known about the 19th century, as early on the art trade began to fascinate writers, including such well-known authors as Honoré de Balzac and the Goncourt brothers, who provided both fictional and real accounts of it in their writings. Particularly interesting are the accounts of Edmond de Goncourt, as he and his brother themselves were active, if not fanatic, collectors who focused their collecting furor on 18th century French drawings. Like 17th and 18th century collectors, the Goncourt brothers frequented public auctions, as we see in this etching by Edmond, where you see all the drawings hanging on the wall and all the bidders sitting in their chairs. The auctions may have actually combined prints and drawings, and of course this we cannot really see very clearly. Edmond also made an interesting kind of written account about where you could buy drawings in Paris. This account was written in 1881, but it referred really to a long time ago, by that time, to the 1830s and 40s. And here is Edmond's account. Who remembers today the old Place du Carrousel with all those heaving, overstuffed portfolios standing by the doors of its hundreds of booths? And here you see one of these booths. This is actually a booth where they sell lithographic prints, but the same kind of booth, I think, is what, what de Goncourt is referring to here. And then he goes on and he says, at 16, I bought there my first drawing, a watercolor by Boucher. Who remembers those heaving, overstuffed portfolios under the arcades of the Institut and all along the quays? I found there one day in a portfolio that cost 20 sous, 9 croquis by Gabriel de Saint-Aubin glued on the same sheet. Croquis for an illustration of Voltaire's Zadig, which was never executed. Who remembers the portfolios by the rummage stores of the Boulevard Beaumarchais, and in the recesses of all those old crumbling walls and abandoned religious edifices, as well as around that Chapelle Nicolas at the end of the Faubourg Saint-Honoré, where the owner hung his most beautiful drawings on a nail driven into the decaying stone. There, for 3 francs, I became the owner of one of my prettiest drawings by Cochin. For in those years, the 1830s and 40s, there were drawings everywhere. Drawings mixed in with scrap iron, drawings exhibited among corkscrews on sidewalk corners, end quote. Though the Goncourt's passage would make us believe that much of the drawing trade in the early 19th century was on the seedy side, not all drawing dealers were selling their wares in market stalls or on the street. Edmond recalls that there were also more established drawing dealers set up in shops. But they too, according to his descriptions, were small tradesmen rather than major dealers. Edmond refers to a certain Mayer, an English dealer, who did not hesitate to complete himself the drawings that he felt were too unfinished, as well as old Guy Chardot, a little old drawing dealer whom Edmond referred to as the gnome des vieux dessins, or the old drawing troll. As Goncourt remembers and Balzac confirms, the drawing trade changed sometime in the middle of the 19th century, when drawings were no longer sold on the street, in flea markets, or in second-hand shops, but in more respectable galleries. This change went hand in hand with a new use of drawings, which now were no longer kept in portfolios, but framed behind glass and hung on the wall, as we see in photographs of the apartment of the Goncourt brothers. Here's a photograph taken in 1883, and there are several more where you see the drawings all framed and matted and hung on the wall. This practice of framing drawings and hanging them on the wall had long been used for pastels and watercolors, which since the 18th century had been used as wall decorations. But it had been rare in the case of drawings in the strict sense of the word, by which I mean monochrome drawings, black and white drawings. This move of drawings from the portfolio to the wall is a complex phenomenon that has a number of different reasons. The first, I think, is related to the aesthetic of the drawing. In an interesting article on the early appreciation of drawings, Julius Held has shown that in the 18th century, real connoisseurs appreciated drawings for the way they gave evidence to an artist's genius. Since drawings often represent the first idea or concept of a work of art, they were considered to be closer to the artist's inspiration. It was believed that an artist's spontaneous drawing was more revealing of his or her talent than his more belabored paintings. In other words, 18th century connoisseurs admired the rapid croquis because it seemed to provide a glimpse into the mind of the artist. If there was, as well, in the 18th century, an interest in more finished drawings, that interest was not supported by theory. Now, in the 19th century, as collecting increasingly became a middle-class pastime, less supported by theoretical discussions on art, there was a professed and ever-growing interest in the finished drawing, the drawing that we might call the picture drawing, which lent itself to be framed and hung on the wall. Now, I'm not sure what's happening here, but let me see. I must have pressed on something. Huh?
Click on that box that says resume, that little box that's over the picture.
Oh, it's over the picture? I never use this kind of cursor, so I'm a little lost here. Oh, here, resume. Okay, there we are. Thank you very much. Now, a second interest for the new interest in black and white drawings was photography. Invented in the 1830s, it remained largely tonal, i.e. black and white or sepia and white, until the end of the 19th century. From the beginning, the daguerreotype, the Talbot type, and their numerous photographic successors were admired for the way they translated reality into terms of light and dark, as we see in this early daguerreotype. This new appreciation for monochromatic images led to a new tonal aesthetic that manifested itself in paintings as well as in a new interest in black and white drawings. The third reason, I believe, for the new interest in black and white drawings was the simultaneous fashion for black and white reproductive prints, which was actively promoted from the 1830s onwards by print dealers, most notably by Adolphe Goupil. Goupil print shops, which were located throughout Europe and the US, created a fashion for the use of black and white prints as wall decorations. And here's a Goupil print. Framed in black or gold, Goupil's prints with their broad white borders or white mats were hung on the green, garnet, collared, or brown wool coverings that became fashionable in the second half of the 19th century. For the most part, the prints that were sold by Goupil and other print dealers were not original artist prints, but print reproductions of paintings made by various techniques such as lithography, photography, and various photomechanical processes. The fashion for such prints lasted from the middle of the 19th until well into the 20th century. And I can clearly remember them from my childhood when black and white photogravures of famous masterpieces decorated the house of my grandparents. Both prints and photographs, then, created a new aesthetic of black and white that had an impact on the collecting of drawings. Collectors in the second half of the 19th century were interested in drawings that were finished, like photographs or the black and white reproductions of paintings that had been made fashionable by Goupil. They wanted drawings that could be framed and hung on the wall. And this new demand for finished picture drawings led to a new phenomenon, the drawing produced directly for the market. From the late 1840s onwards, a number of artists began to make drawings for that purpose, which they exhibited at the Salon, offered to collectors, or which were commissioned from them by dealers who found an increasingly ready market for such works. The new popularity of the finished monochrome drawing was closely related to the increased use of charcoal, which became the drawing medium of the second half of the 19th century. While it had been around for a long time, artists had generally used charcoal for underdrawings on canvases or walls and not for finished works. In the first half of the 19th century, it became widely used in the academy for quick life sketches and later on increasingly for finished drawings as well. As the interest in charcoal increased, manufacturers of artistic charcoal began to improve and vary its production. Charcoal became available in a wide range of tones, from intense black to various shades of gray, in different qualities, from coarse to fine, and in various formats, from powdered charcoal in tins to compressed charcoal sticks that could be held in a holder, or charcoal pencils that were sheathed in wood. And here you see a self-portrait, charcoal portrait by Degas, where he holds a charcoal holder with a piece of charcoal in his right hand. By the middle of the 19th century, the suitability of charcoal for purposes and subjects other than life drawing were discovered. The first of these purposes was the finished landscape drawing. Artists like Auguste Allongé, Adolphe Appillon, Jean-Joseph François Bellel, and Maxime Lalanne popularized the finished frameable charcoal landscape drawing. From 1848 onwards, such drawings were exhibited at the annual salons, and they were marketed and collected. Charcoal drawing also became a popular amateur medium, and a host of how-to books on the subject were published, beginning with Maxime Lalanne's Le Fusain in 1849, which was published in numerous editions. And there were a whole host of these books. I won't give you all the names, but they were very, very popular in the second half of the 19th century. Three drawings in the Weisberg collection exemplify the finished charcoal landscape drawing of the late 1840s, 1850s, and 60s. Adolphe Appillon's Landscape and Sunset is a large-size drawing. It's 23 plus by 34 plus inches, that would have been framed and hung in a bourgeois home or apartment. Indeed, we know that it belonged to a private collector in Lyon, Appillon's native city, and in all likelihood it had been in his family's possession for several generations. Appillon's landscape is done entirely in charcoal on buff paper, but he has achieved a range of tonalities ranging from deep black to very light gray that is quite astounding. And I was looking at it yesterday, and you really can see, if you look carefully, that he uses different kinds of charcoal that, by which he's able to kind of achieve this incredible kind of tonal effect. Maxime Lalanne, in his landscape with a house behind large oak trees, has combined charcoal with white chalk and white gouache to achieve an even broader range of tones, ranging from deep black to bright white. Both drawings are clearly indebted to photography. It is not that they were drawn from photographs. Indeed, manuals on charcoal drawing explicitly advise against this practice. But the interest in capturing effects of light and shade in the most precise and accurate manner shows that these artists had looked at photography and gained an appreciation for the subtleties of light and dark effects that could be achieved in that medium. Indeed, the subtle play of light on the leaves, which is one of the outstanding characteristics of the Lalanne drawing, seems to owe a certain amount to contemporary photographs, such as the one by Gustave Le Gray that you see on your right. The example of Appian and Lalanne was followed by Jean-François Millet, who was attracted to charcoal for its economic potential. Millet realized that drawings, which took less time to produce than paintings, were within the means of a middle-class clientele that could not afford paintings, but that wanted something more than reproductive prints on the wall. Drawings, therefore, opened up a new niche in the market for original art and a way for artists to produce additional income. This was important to Millet, who had 9 children to feed and was perennially short of money. By the late 1850s, he was already selling his drawings widely, even making them on commission. In a letter to his friend and patron Alfred Sancier of September 5, 1865, he informed him that a certain Monsieur Gavet, who was an architect, an art dealer, and a collector, had asked him for no less than 20 drawings. And this is what he writes, quote, "Gavet came over yesterday with Rousseau. He asked me to make 20 drawings to begin with, but he told me there was no reason why that should be the limit. He said to me, I could as well ask you to make 50 instead of 20, but let's begin with 20. I told him it would be 350 francs per normal-sized drawing, but those that will be especially important will go for 500, end quote. Gavet was not the only dealer to commission drawings from Millet. Artists like Bugnet and Deschamps also ordered drawings from him, and so did some private collectors, like the well-known French collector and arts administrator Philippe de Chennevières. Millet not only produced landscape, but also genre drawings. Many of these were repetitions of his paintings, like his drawing of the Angelus of 1860 that you see here. The effect of this drawing, interestingly, would have been very similar to a lithographic reproduction of this painting. And you see the drawing on the upper right, and you see the reproduction on the lower right, and see that they're not really that terribly different. But for the client who bought the drawing, it would have had the advantage of authenticity. It was not a mechanical reproduction, it was reproduced by Millet's own hand. Millet, who drew widely, not only used charcoal, but also Conté crayon, a medium that had been invented during the Napoleonic Wars when there was a shortage of graphite. Named after its inventor, Nicolas Jacques Conté, Conté crayons were made of a mixture of graphite, black pigment, and clay, which were held together by a slightly waxy binder. Some artists preferred Conté over charcoal because it was easier to control. And you see, indeed, this drawing, I mention it here because this drawing is done in Conté crayon, it does create a slightly different effect. It's not quite as smooth as charcoal. François Bonvin was another artist of Millet's generation to produce finished genre drawings. In effect, he appears to have done so well before Millet. A clerk for the Paris police, and initially no more than a part-time amateur artist, Bonvin allegedly sold his drawings in the street as early as the 1840s. Discovered there by the collector Laurent Laperlier, who would become his friend and patron, he gradually made art his profession, but he continued to produce finished drawings for direct sale to dealers and collectors who liked to have his framed drawings on the wall. Bonvin's The Rack Picker of 1852 in the exhibition, and his Woman Spinning Wool of 1861 are good examples of his work. 9 years apart, the drawings appear to reflect the increasing interest on the part of collectors in overall finished drawings, in which not only the figure, but also the backgrounds are completely worked out. And you can perhaps see that even better when you compare when you compare this drawing from 1861 with this other drawing also in the Weisberg collection of 1852, where this, the background is still kind of left rather sketchy, you see that here it's completely worked out. There's an increasing taste for these kind of picture drawings that are like photographs. The successor of Millet and Bonvin as a draftsman of genre scenes was Léon Augustin Hermite, who carried the black and white drawing to unprecedented heights. Two drawings in the Weisberg collection exemplify the complexity of L'Hermite's drawings, which required a real mastery of the charcoal or the crayon. Feast of the Company of the Archers is a multi-figure composition that shows clergy and laymen gathered together in a dimly lit church interior. The way L'Hermite has characterized the faces of the archers, the old men in the background, through little judicious touches of black alternated with the off-white of the paper is really quite amazing. It's really kind of technically just incredible. L'Hermite had studied at the École de Dessin, or drawing school, which functioned as a sort of prep school for the École des Beaux-Arts, which was the most famous art school in Paris. His teacher at the École de Dessin had been Horace Lecoq de Boisbaudran, whose teaching method centered on the training of his students' visual memory. Students could not draw from a model in Lecoq's studio, but they were only allowed to look at it, and then they had to produce their drawings from memory. Lecoq's training had given L'Hermite an extraordinary power of observation that manifests itself clearly in his drawings, whether they were highly finished, like his drawing of the archer, or more loosely drawn, like the drawing of the weaver, which is also in the exhibition. L'Hermite's Feast of the Company of the Archers was exhibited in 1880 at the Exposition du Blanc et Noir, or the Black and White exhibition, held in the Galerie de l'Art in Paris. Black and white exhibitions, which featured drawings as well as artist prints, most notably etchings, were popular in France in the 1880s and represent the culmination of the tonal aesthetic that had begun in the middle of the century and would gradually diminish from 1890s onwards. The idea for the black and white exhibitions had come from England, where the first such show had been held in the early 1870s. The idea for black and white exhibitions would spread from there to the US, where the Selma Gandhi Club organized a series of black and white exhibitions from 1878 to 1887, and then it also moved to France, where several black and white exhibitions were held between 1885 and 1891. All of these exhibitions were meant to promote the monochrome drawing as a work of art in its own right, to be collected and to be used as wall decoration. And they were successful. All across Europe, black and white drawings were popular, as is borne out by the Weisberg collection, which shows numerous black and white drawings by such artists as François Maréchal, Charles Middelsando, and the Belgian Xavier Mellery. And you see here Maréchal and Mellery in these two drawings. Many of the early works of Vincent van Gogh are monochrome drawings as well. And it is well known that he actively studied these charcoal drawing manuals that I mentioned earlier, in particular one by Carl Robert that was very, very popular in the 19th century. Now, in emphasizing the 19th century interest in black and white picture drawings, I may have created the false impression that these drawings had a monopoly in the drawing market in the late 19th century. It must be noted, however, that such drawings were sold side by side with watercolors and especially pastels, which were also very popular at the time. Representing a medium halfway between drawing and painting, pastels and watercolors had been marketed by artists directly to collectors and dealers since the 18th century, and they had long been used as wall decorations. The Weisberg collection gives ample proof that the interest in pastels and watercolors survived side by side with the interest in black and white drawings. Indeed, Many of the same artists who provided black and white drawings, such as Millet and L'Hermite, also worked in watercolors and pastels. And while L'Hermite exhibited frequently in the black and white exhibitions, he also exhibited in the exhibitions of the Société des Pastelistes, the Society of the Pastel Artists. And here you see an example of a L'Hermite pastel in the Brooklyn Museum. In conclusion, the Weisberg collection is interesting and in many ways unique because it gives an impression of the kind of drawings that middle-class collectors would have bought in the 19th century for the purpose of decorating their walls. Many of them would have been bought directly from the artist or perhaps even commissioned from him. The fact that little is known about the provenance of these drawings is indicative of the fact that few were owned by the grand drawing collectors of the 19th century that owned thousands of drawings stored away in portfolios, and that would probably have been provided with collector's mark. With some notable exceptions, the drawings, watercolors, and pastels in the Weisberg collection would have graced the walls of middle-class apartments or homes, giving pleasures to their owners in the same way as hanging in the Weisberg apartments, they give pleasure to their owners. And we're very grateful to them for sharing their collection with us. Thank you. Questions? Shall I entertain questions or not? Right. I made it all so clear that during the